Hello, everyone. Please let me know if you can hear me in the comments, please. I hope that's a yes, actually. Can everybody hear me? Great. Thanks, Jack. Well, welcome, everyone. I'm back from Thailand. Last week, Harris did the introduction for our first virtual meetup. And today we're kicking off with our second virtual meetup, specifically on Vue. My God, look at the glasses, Sebastian. Yeah, thanks, Seb. Usually I'm wearing contacts. I was a little bit too lazy after working for the fourth day in a row from home. I took the effort to put on a shirt, though, as you usually see me in. But I'm really, really excited that we already see growing numbers in our live audience at the moment with 43 already. We hope that the number rises over time. To not keep you any longer, we're really excited to start with Eduardo today. Eduardo is going to do some live code, and he will share with you his experience on Vue Router. So with further ado, please, Eduardo, take it away.
Hey, hi everyone. I hope you can hear me. Can I get some confirmation if everything is good? 1 or 2. Can you hear me, Josh, by the way? Or not? I hope it's good. So I want to talk about a little bit about the router, especially the new version. I don't have something very well prepared. There is no slides or anything, but I want to cover some of the new features, show them, show some code as well, answer some questions at the same time as you have them. So I will be looking at the live comments at the same time, and hopefully I should be able to answer those questions. Also give some hints for people who want to contribute maybe, and overall get some conversation going for anybody who has questions about the new version, upcoming features, things changing, etc. So I'm gonna start sharing my screen. I think that would be the best. Yes, this one. Sure. Josh, can you move it? Oh, perfect. Yes, nice. Okay, so we have the open a terminal here. Move it down. Make sure I can see when I show. So the repository is available under the under Vue Router Next, under the organization, you can have it. Something that people do not realize is that there is some projects here where I try to keep things, it's kind of a roadmap. So if you have, like if you want to contribute to stuff, I try to put small actionable to-dos here. Sometimes a lot of tests that can be added, and I think is one of the easiest way of contribute and to get more familiar with the code as well. And other things that are more complicated. There are a couple requests for comments ongoing. So on the RFC's repo, you have a label for router. And there is only one that has been merged so far, which is a vslot API, which we're going to talk about a little bit. There are a few things that I still think we need some feedback, but they are looking good, like dynamic routing, merging the meta fields, and changing how the active and exact active behavior works on routerling. And I'm going to talk about them real quick. So just get all the things ready so I can follow at the same time the comments and everything. Otherwise, it's a bit complicated. And I hope you can hear my Mac fans because they're going crazy. It's gonna lay off anytime. So let's talk about the one that is merged. So the one that is merged is available on the current version of Vue Router, which is the Slot API. The thing is, this API, now that we have the composition API, we can also get it through a simple function. So these open some possibilities. So for example, if we go here, let's open it. Yes. Whoa. I don't need to change the font on a live stream. Oh, okay, we'll do it. Here, I don't, this is not the right, where is it? There we go. Okay, it's lagging as hell. My computer is not able to handle it. So this is the new, this is the new one. Let's take a look at the playground. The playground is a folder you can find in the repository where I just try things out. I try to put new features. It's shipped for the moment because it's some kind of example where you can rely on before there is documentation. And I can run it, and you can run it as well if you do a yarn dev, and that will. I need to close this one. Can't close it. There we go. I have too many things open. Here, okay, localhost. There we go. So it's a bit of a mess, so to say, because I have like everything there, but it's pretty much a way to play with things. So the scope, the vSlot API basically allows you to retrieve the logic behind the router link. So let me go to the example. On a router link, you can say vSlot and extract everything that is useful, everything that is used to render the link to a specific page. For example, it contains the actual link that you want to render, it contains the base, everything, contains the function to navigate away, and the logic for is the link active, exact active, etc. Now, this API, as you can imagine, can also be extracted as a function using the composition API. So for example, on, I think I'm going to put on dark. Yes. So on the new version, pretty much all the logic is a function. So there is a useLink. The color, syntax color is weird, but whatever. There is a useLink function here that receives pretty much the same as a router link and contains everything you want, and at the end returns you the route, the href is active, is active, and navigate. So basically everything you can see through a vSlot is achievable here through a function, which means that if we go to, let's go to the app.vue, we can, for example, say, here, we could say use link. Oh, it's not gonna. This is not the usual user I use something else at the inside of the versions. I have nothing else set up. So you can import the function use link. There you go. And I can say some, I don't know, what could be users 3 use link, and then I can provide some options. So here I should have 2. And I can say anything that is the same as the router link 2. So I can say users 3. And this is going to give me an object with a lot of things. So I can, oops, I can get everything there like this. So I have the route, the href, everything we saw before. Now, for example, if we want to take a look real quick, we can go into the project here. Up. put the variable here. I didn't want to put a paragraph. I want to put a pre so we can have the code. There we go. And now, where's my page? There we go. So we have here the whole content that is retrieved by the use link, and we can see there are a few things that we shouldn't touch too much. But we have the route, which is a normalized version of a location. So it has things like a full path, the path, the query as an object, the parameters as an object, the hash as well, the name of the route is if it has any, and then a match, which is an array of route records that you have on your that we use to render the view. So we have the meta as well. And here you can see that the href is user3, is active is false, and is exact active is false as well, because we're on slash, so it's not going to change yet. But if we go to, for example, users3, so I'm navigating with some buttons, just so you can see here the URL is user3. Here you're going to see that the is active becomes true, is exact active as well, because the URL matches this link we have generated. So this is very practical for people who want to use Tailwind and other CSS framework to create their own links. They can create wrappers as well to create some custom behavior around that, etc. So this is something that has been merged. What about the things that hasn't been merged yet? Dynamic routing is a big chunk of it. The cool stuff, the cool part is that the API you are exposed is quite small. There isn't that much. Behind the scenes, there is a lot more, but it also allows me to improve things in the future without breaking the API. Another thing I've been working recently on is use view, which is basically, I know it sounds weird when it's pronounced, but it looks something like this. So this is an end-to-end test. There we go. This route, and then we have use view. Here we go. So this is basic. This is it changed quite a lot the way you think about the router, because one of the things that constrain the use of URL right now is that the URL you're at is connected to a component, a page that you want to render, and the router view is gonna create that connection. So some features are not achievable or are very hard to implement because of that. For example, if you want to change the URL when you have a model, so that the user can copy the URL and share easily that URL, it's very hard to do so, because if you change the URL, the router is going to reroute and is going to display something else. So the idea here is to disconnect, is to break that connection between what we display and the URL and be able to escape that. So useView is going to give you a component based on a route and say this is what you should display. So what we do is that instead of giving, it's as if we have a prop on router view and we said that the location we are at is not the one that you're seeing on the URL. So this route with model, as you can see here, is a computer property. And this computer property is going to check on the history state, more about that a bit later, if we have a property, a background view. And if we have a background view, it's going to resolve that URL, which means that we're going to, if we have some on the state, the global, like global state, but related to the history, we have some URL, we're going to say, okay, this, instead of relying on the route, which is just use route, so it's basically the location we are at, we're going to have a different one. So this history state that you see here is simply the, oh, where is it? Here. It's a way to hook into the history state. So right now, the view router uses this a lot to provide some extra information. And for example, if we're in a model, I'm going to launch the examples, the end-to-end samples. So end-to-end. And it's the same URL, but here. Come on. Is it loading? No, it's not loading. There we go. So we have this model, which is what I'm showing. And so we have history.state here, and we can see that there are some information on the scroll position, where are we going, where are we currently, what route we're going later on, if it will replace, and other stuff. It doesn't mean it's public API, but it's used internally by the router. So for example, if we click on some user, we're gonna see that the URL changes. We have the correct params, we can go back home, we can navigate back, etc. The idea here is we can display a model with that information, and we have the URL looking like it was the user. But if we go to that URL directly, we're gonna end up on the page with the user detail, which is pretty much like I think Twitter doesn't do it anymore, but Instagram does it. I think Pinterest doesn't do it anymore. It's a bit weird. It's a feature that is very easy to mess up with because it involves a history. But it does have some utilities like sharing content on social media and stuff like that. So the thing is, if we reload, we're gonna still see the model and everything because we saved that in the state. We can remove that if we want before leaving, but we're gonna see that here we have this new property background view, which means that by default, in this entry, no matter what the location, the actual URL we have, we want to display the home. The home is this page you're seeing here. The reason we don't see /model is because that's the base of the route. So it comes before and it's ignoring all the routes. It's only used for the link generation. So what we do is we look at this value, and if there is one, we resolve the URL using the router resolve mechanism, so we can retrieve a normalized version of the route, and we give to the router view and say, this is the route you have to render. And the router view is going to render something else. And then what we use is use the same state. So we know that there is a model going on because we have a background view, so we can render a model here, and we can still use the route. The current route is still the one that you have on the URL, so you can still retrieve the params and everything normally. So if you look at where's the home? Here. There is a model here, and you can see that we have a user ID. So it's not very readable because it's a string template, I know, but still bear with me. So you have here, you can see that we have the route, and we use that normally because that route still changes, and we just open a model and close it. Cool stuff is that it's preserved on navigation. So if we navigate away, we're gonna see that there. And if we go again away, we're gonna close the model. We can open it again, going back and forth. So that's pretty cool. These does involve some changes that still need to go, I think, through an RFC, but they are likely to see light in some way or another. Mainly, the thing that should go for an RFC is probably the use view function, and also the fact that we can save state using history state. This is something that needs some discussion because it was not exposed on purpose before, but given the support of a history API and the browsers we support, it makes sense to expose these API and document what is possible and what isn't, without having any extra layer on top of it, just being able to store something in history.state. It's more of an advanced feature than a basic feature, as you cannot store anything. You have very constrained things you can store on the history state. For example, symbols are ignored. Functions, of course, do not make any sense because you only have plain state. But that's goes a bit further away. Another change a big change that I want to introduce as well for the best. So basically, this is something that should fix things for most people, and they shouldn't even realize that it's changing anything. But the active behavior and exit behavior is changing from two things, including query and hash on the check. So basically, it means that if you have a router link, and the router link points to a URL with a query and a hash, in order for that link to be active, it has to match inclusively everything, the path, the query, and the hash, to the one that you're visiting. Most of the time, based on the feedback on people, the query and the hash do not matter. The only thing that matters is path. However, only doing a match based on the path is not that interesting. It will be very simple to do it yourself, but ticker tape? I don't know what the ticker tape is. Based on the URL you wanna make the link active or not. So instead of doing on just the path, we can do on the records. Now, a record is the entry that is given to the router to define a route. So for example, aliases and other things are gonna relate to each other because it's internally the same record. To give you an example, let's go here again. We have a lot of routes, but we have, for example, 2 routes here. As you can see at the bottom of the screen, the URL that it generates is different. It's an alias. So here you have a string, and if I go to this other, you have a different string, but they are effectively the same route, and the same thing renders. Now they both of them appear active because they are related. This is not the case on current version of the router. Because we also do this comparison using the records, we don't need to use the exact prop anymore for things like, oh, we are on the slash and we don't want that link to be active on any page, which is the current caveat that we see. So that disappears. For example, home here is slash and it's not active. So instead, what exact does, well, as a prop, it doesn't make as much sense anymore, but the difference is more related to children of routes or not. So here, for example, we have some nested routes. So this is a big list because I added aliases and everything just to show you the mess. This is a bit push as an example, but it's for me to test basically. If we go to the router, we're gonna see that the nested here. Where is the nested? Here. We have a path, and then we have an alias, and then we have another path with another alias, and inside we have another path, and we have other paths inside, and they all have different aliases. Some of them also have an absolute URL, which means that the URL, instead of having slash nested slash also as absolute, they just have slash absolute. So what is interesting is if I click here, for example, you'll see that these 2 links here are in orange because they are active, because they are the parents of the location where we are at right now. And these ones, which are all aliases of the same route, even though they generate different URLs, they are all marked as exact active because they represent the same location from a router's perspective. So this is a big improvement as well that is coming. All the things. Navigations. Oh yeah. So the dynamic routing. The API that is faced by the user is quite simple. Most of the time, you won't even need to use it. Most people don't even need it, but they will still benefit from this because it means that now the router is able to reorganize, or rather to order them correctly, which means that if you have a route that is more generic and is more likely to accept many different things, and you have another route that is more precise, the more precise one is going to be matched first. So a very simple example is if you have 2 routes, one that is /home and one that is a column page. This column page here, it's a dynamic parameter, which means it can accept anything. So if you go into /home, both routes would match. In current Vue router version, if you put both of them in the wrong order, so let's say you put the one with the dynamic parameter, and then you put the one with the slash, you will end up always matching the one with the dynamic parameter because that one is matched first. On the new version of Vue router, they have scores and they are ordered correctly, so they are tested in the right order. And it feels like the router is guessing the route that you want. So this enables many other things, right? Because dynamic routing by itself, it's convenient, but it's necessary for other things like declarative routing, which is something that you might have come with if you have used React, because that's the main way you do routes with React, and it works very well with the model. The API itself is not complicated, and the idea of the router is not to give you declarative routing per se, but rather to give you the way to create that, or for maintainers to, or library authors to create a new one. The IPA itself is quite simple. Like you have adding a route, removing routes, and that's the dynamic routing itself. And then you can check if there is a route and get the route records, which is more of an advanced feature because most of the time you won't even need that. But at the end, it's just pretty much a function that returns an array that is internal somewhere. If you have come across dynamic routing and you plan on using it, it would be really nice to have a bit more feedback on the RFC. So far, it looks good. So it's probably going to enter the final comments state pretty soon. So I want to avoid leaving any blank, any usage that is someone would like to have outside of the scope. And what else is interesting? So I can have a few more minutes. Yeah, contributing to Vue next. So there is a board here with things that can be done. The architecture of the new repository is a bit different from the old one. And the testing part is very, very different. On the new one, there is a lot of unit tests. And right now, they are not that many end-to-end tests yet because they have to add it. And the idea is that we prioritize the unit tests because they run faster, they are easier to write most of the time, not always. And we use the end-to-end test to test features that involve multiple things about the router. So for example, if you need to combine the behavior of the router view and also the behavior of the router resolution, you might want to write an integration test. And sometimes it's easier to write an end-to-end test directly than writing an integration test as using jest. Other behaviors that has to be tested with end-to-end are everything that is browser-related, scroll behavior, browser bugs like Internet Explorer being Internet Explorer, and stuff like that. Improvements to, okay, so all the things that are interesting to note is that on the project, there are many to-dos. So if you look for to-do, you're going to see the to-do as they appear. Some of them may be outdated or anything, but if you want to work on something and you're not sure if something is outdated or not, feel free to reach me on Discord. Maybe someone is working on it as well, but that way I can create a card and put it on the board so that other people do not pick the same work. Of course, that will be limited to my availability, but so far it's still good. There are also some tests that need to be written. So if you look for it.todo, you will find tests that need to be written. Some of them may be also outdated, so make sure to reach out. Some of them are being worked by other people as well, so make sure to reach out if you want to do anything. Upcoming RFCs. There is a few things that I want to improve also based on issues that exist on the router. One of them is the promise-based navigation. So right now, when you do a push or replace, it gives you a promise. So both versions, the new version and the current version of your router. If you do, so R is just the router. I can do push, and I can, for example, push users 1. This is going to give me a promise, as you can see here. And right now, the resolution of the rejection of the promise are based on the callbacks that were passed before on the push. I think that most of the time, the rejection doesn't make sense, as what you want to know is only if there was no error on the navigation. So rather than rejecting the promise returned by push, I will write an RFC, I'm writing it, about navigation failures as opposing to navigation errors. So a navigation failure will be simply the fact that a navigation doesn't end. So for example, if a navigation starts, let's say you have a navigation guard fetching something, and the user clicks somewhere to go to that page, the user, and while the application is fetching the new user, they realize, oh, I actually wanted to go here. So they click to another link. The previous navigation is going to get canceled itself. That's a navigation failure. It's not an error, but the navigation itself failed. So the current behavior makes the premise reject. Ideally, the premise should only reject if there is an actual error. So if you do next on a navigation guard with an error, or if you found an error, that should reject the promise. And the idea is to define these navigation failures so that the user can hook into the failure when the premise is resolved, so they can do different things. So if the navigation was canceled, maybe display I don't know, a spinner or whatever they want. Another thing that is improved as well is that we can now get a bit more information about the navigation itself. So for example, we can know the direction and stuff like that. If we go, for example, I'm using too many things here. I don't know what I wrote a little thing that shouldn't. I'm gonna remove that real quick. Here, let's move here. There we go. So I do a few navigations here. And I clear. And if I go back, I can detect that the navigation is a back navigation and that the navigation comes from a pub. That means that it was using the browser interface to navigate. If I go forward, I get the pub as well, but with a forward. And this information is not available yet. It also needs to go through an RFC to think about how this information is exposed. It will be exposed on the navigation guides, by the way, which is where this information can be useful. So for example, I can go here and show you that I have the router history here. I can listen and I get some information. So if I do, for example, a navigation like this, I don't see it because I'm navigating through the router, but the idea is that I could expose on the guards a type that is just a push. It can also be a replace. And then the pub will be only if we navigate through these buttons, or if we also do, or your code does a history back as well, or history forward, which also triggers those functions. And I think that's pretty much everything I have time to talk about and I want to talk about. Great. Okay. So if you have any questions about the Vue router, the behavior it has, new behavior, the changes, contributing or anything, just post them on the live comment, and I will see them because I'm reading it right now. And I guess I will let Josh to come in as well. No? Yeah.
Hello.
Feel so lonely there.
I won't leave you hanging, Eduardo. Well, if nobody has any questions, maybe we can wait for a few seconds, but it seems like, or it was mind-blowing that people need to process it first, or
No.
or it's super clear, or hopefully they can also reach out to you after this meetup still.
Yeah.
If there are any questions regarding your topic presented. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Eduardo, for really participating in knowledge sharing, also online, specifically in times like these. It's really useful for people, and maybe a little bit of a highlight in their sober or in their setback evenings when they're sitting at home by themselves. So really, I hope you can appreciate the big digital applause you're receiving right now. And oh, wait, we have some questions actually. I think it lagged a little. When do you expect to release?
2022. There is already a release as an alpha that you can use with Vue 3. It will go a little bit slower than the Vue 3. I mean, it's not slower. The library is smaller than Vue, so it will go a bit faster. I still do want to do the RFCs and get them right. But you already tried the alpha version. I will keep releasing versions. They sometimes have breaking changes, of course, because it's the alpha period, so it's the moment to get the API right. And after the beta, it won't have, the idea is to follow the same as Vue core and not have breaking changes on the same phase as them. But I think that the Vue router will enter beta after Vue has entered beta, but it will definitely do it before Vue is released as a stable version. How to get the board? Can I?
I think when you share your screen again, it should
let's share the
rearrange.
screen. Yeah, that should be easier. Okay, share it right now. Can you? Perfect. So on the repository of Vue router next, there is a project usually. I hope I'm not saying anything stupid and it's not private by default. Yeah, it's public. So you can see that there are different things like a roadmap and task. The roadmap is more higher level. It's for us to give some vision in it. And then you have the task, which are actionable things that people can do. If something is in progress, it means that someone is working on it. It doesn't have to be me necessarily. And ideally, if someone wants to want to work on something, they could look into this to find something. I would try to keep adding things as I come up with things that haven't been done yet and that are takeable by people. Some are more complicated than others because some of them require the person to be more familiar with the code base, of course. And the async component will, so would the async component work as the new Vue 3 syntax for async component? There is no need to use the async component for Vue router because on Vue router, you can still use the syntax with the parentheses. So this makes more sense to show as well. I'm not sure if I have an example. Well, yeah, import. What is this? Oh yeah, this is generated. I don't have an example, but basically the lazy loading of routes doesn't change for Vue router next because it's not an asynchronous component, it's different. You're just, I mean, Sebastian knows because he knows how it's worked, but for other people, lazy loading is more about splitting your application on different chunks. So letting Webpack code split your application properly. The syntax is the same. You have the component, and instead of writing the component and having the import something at the top, you create a variable that is a function that returns the import, something that looks like, so let's say we have on the, here, imagine I'd want the user page to be dynamic. It should be something like this. So this is like the older version. And what should work? Although I don't want to, still trying out things, but as you can see, it still works. So if I go, for example, to home, reload the page and go network, the user is not retrieved. And then when I go into the page, it looks like it's not retrieving it. Maybe I need to look at something else. On the demo, maybe it's not app. But it doesn't change the API.
Okay. Well, Eduardo, thank you very much for answering all questions. Specifically, indeed, thank you for presenting tonight. I think a lot of people were interested in it. and there were some great questions in it. We hope to receive you again in the future. And well, please stay tuned or stay with us. And I hope to see you soon again.
Yeah, see you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Eduardo. Well, I won't keep you any longer. I will introduce our next speaker. We know Roman for quite a long time. He's making me look bad at this stage because he's actually wearing the really nice attire from Vuejs Amsterdam, and I am like brandless at this stage. But I'm really, really happy that he's wearing it. Roman is gonna talk to you about serverless, Vue, and Node today. And further, I will leave it up to you, Roman. Thank you very much for speaking in the first place.
Yeah, hello everybody. Is it possible that my screen is black? Because for some reason I seem black to myself. Okay, is it working now? It is kind of working now, right? It is. That's very nice. Cool. I'm super excited to be here. That's my first virtual meetup. So I guess what is different to a conference is like I can interact with all of you. This is super nice. And I'll try to have my live screen down here. So if you have any questions during this session, just go ahead and ask. It should be more interactive than a conference is. So let's make use of this. And otherwise, yeah, I'm just going to sit away and just chat a little and talk a little about serverless with Vue and Node. And actually, it's going to be more focused on a little bit serverless static sites with Vue and Node. Because for me, like static sites currently a super exciting topic. And the big question for me is probably like, I started to think about it in the beginning, like I built my new page and I say, okay, of course I'll do it static. And the big question here is like, why are static sites so popular again? Like, why are they on the rise? Kind of like everybody talks about it and they're a big topic. Even Debbie is going to talk a little more about it later. That is exciting. And I made a short look at StaticGen. It's like just a page listing all static site generators. And like even in JavaScript world only, there's like a ton of them, right? But this is like really impressive. So it is something that we need. And I wonder really why are the static sites so relevant today as we have like so much other things and we come from a different background. So I tried for me to break it down a little bit and say, okay, if I think back at one of the first websites that I built, like basically I started to learn like some HTML and that was very much a static site. And it was completely limited by what I was able to do. And that was not great from my experience. So very soon I started to say, oh, let's introduce something like a backend. And I personally, I started to learn like PHP because then I was able like to do a lot of kind of cool things and prepare a lot of stuff that I need on the front end to kind of render some HTML. And what I liked about PHP back then is like these things start to kind of melt into each other. And suddenly you were kind of writing a full backend application and your front end was kind of like heavily influenced by what you were doing on the back end and all this kind of stuff. And you were generating your HTML on the fly. So that was all quite interesting. But then something happened or so, like JavaScript really evolved and we thought about it and said, okay, like we want to have like more separation because like our pages got more and more complex, at least. And so those things I felt like start to split up again, right? So we suddenly have something like the back end and the front end. And like this is, if we want to be like super blunt, it's like just a website again, right? A very static one. And I think the whole pattern of like using single page applications and having things like Vue driving this whole thing, that was like really, really helpful and made it like more appealing. So moving a little further is it's ended up being like I say, okay, we can also do like a lot of static sites here. And the cool thing is about the backend was able to evolve as well. I don't need to write all the backend stuff anymore. Like I can use the serverless backend, right? That's a super weird term, but like, yeah, that was the big summary there. And at this point, like there's like, for me, the question, okay, what does serverless actually mean, right? Serverless backend, super weird term actually. And what does serverless mean is probably also an odd question to ask in 2020. Because we all agreed some time ago that actually kind of means nothing, right? So the question is, for me, which is more important, is how do we experience serverless today? How do we like build our applications? How do we as developers in this case like experience it? And in this question, I want to use like the interactivity of this platform and give me some kind of like emojis or so. If you're using serverless in your day-to-day work by now, and think, okay, that's part of what you're doing as a developer. Can I see emojis? Not sure if my screen just died or not. We'll see. I see a thumbs up. That's not. Okay. Oh, very sorry, Vanessa. Very sorry. Okay, there's a lot of cool things happening. That's nice. So yeah, serverless. Some use it, some not or so, and definitely it starts to be kind of sneak more into things in the work that we're doing. And as a developer, I see like basically for us, like there's two main consumers of doing like serverless. If we build something of the serverless infrastructure in the world that we get here. Yeah, totally get you. Like the serverless model and serverless framework, it's super weird. Whoever coined the term serverless, though, was a good move. But yeah, there are two consumers if we build applications, or if we build anything in a serverless infrastructure. That's like on the one side applications, or on the other side it's like static sites, because we can really like enrich our experience there. And the static sites, they can really by now benefit from all the serverless infrastructure that we have, like all the backend that we do not need to build. This is great for us because we can host like images or anything that we want to do, right? And have like complex forms and everything handled on the server, and we don't need to build anything for this one. But why is static site so interesting with this? Because the cool thing is they can like scale very massively, very easily. And one of my favorite examples here is the Smashing Magazine page. Because if there's anyone like reading Smashing Magazine, they're running completely on the what's called like the Jamstack by now. And they're like a full static page. They were one of the biggest WordPress pages back then. But by now, so like everything is static, like their shop is static and all these kind of things. And they use a lot of like serverless infrastructure behind it. And as you know, like they have a lot of readers, a lot of content. So these kind of pages can be really big. And for them, like performance is a big key. And we briefly touched on this, the Jamstack, right? That's one of the magic ingredient behind all of this. And if you've never heard of the term Jamstack, it's like for JavaScript APIs and markup. And it's basically just a super catchy word for saying, okay, I write like a JavaScript application and it uses an API, and then I kind of generate my markup with it or so. It's basically how we build things in a static world, but it just sounds super catchy. And Jamstack, another great term. And I think Netlify is the one kind of like they coined it, and that was a super smart move because I like the term Jamstack a lot. Hey, Andre. Hey. Cool. So let's build some stuff. Like not virtually because I didn't have time to prepare everything in a live coding session. I should next time probably, but let's build something. So let's assume we want to build our kind of like static page. Can be the personal page, can be like an application page or for whatever, right? The first important part is, okay, how can we get our data into this page? So there's something we have like either images or it can come from the cloud, right? From everywhere. We use a hosted CMS or anything like this, like Contentful or Storyblock or anything like this. And this is like preparing our content basically. And on the other side, we can really enrich the whole experience with our serverless infrastructure that we have available for us. Can be any databases or Lambda functions or anything that we want to do, right? Which is quite nice. And the other critical part is our page is like running statically, and if our data comes from somewhere else, we need any kind of like way of communicating between our data and serverless and give our backend basically an update if anything happens, if they should do something, if they need to prepare anything. And that's where kind of hooks come into play, and you can do a lot of things. Or in the thing that we're going to build, we have a few scripts or so that will help us to move forward with these kind of things. Cool. So let's focus on the first part, the data part in the page. And that's the part that I usually call like the pipeline, like how to get everything from A to B. And I kind of smush it all together in a nice pipeline to move it along. So that should be nice. And very soon when I started to build more of these kind of things and play around with static a little more, like the pipeline, how to get things from A to B is like really the key to build any kind of like cool page. So on the one side, you can use like headless CMS or so, but if you want to build things on your own and just say, okay, like I scrap together all the content that I want to build, kind of making this pipeline as smooth as possible is like really important to be successful with static pages. So one thing that I ended up doing, and I think it goes in a way like how kind of other static site builders are doing it sometimes, like Gridsum or Next, I think. I personally end up building like something like a graph.json. And for me, the important thing is I want to automate this, right? So my graph.json is the summary where I say, okay, everything that's in there. And graph is one side, like also a catchy name we hear quite often these days. And the other thing is also like describing what I want to do quite well, right? It's like a graph over all the data that I have and gives me a short link, which is nice. So let's assume we're going to build our page. And in this case, we're going to kind of use some Node on our local system and some classic markdown files. I used this approach for my personal blog because I found it interesting to just like understand how this whole process works, but I also like build a project for a customer at one point. And yeah, we're going to do this all with markdown files. And at this point, oh, there's even sound here. Let's move on better. That scared me a little bit. So, right. So with like just using these markdown files and everything like locally, there's like certain limitations that we put on us because it's like sometimes harder to manage these kind of things. But one thing that I learned kind of as a developer in general and kind of also working with other people and whatever we want to do, like sometimes these limitations are kind of great because like they spark us to do maybe very resourceful ways of kind of solving certain things. But on the other side, like if you, for example, build something for people that are not technically like super adverse, these limitations can be also super helpful. So one example that I have, once I built like for a friend of mine, like they have run a bigger event company in Vienna, and they need a new web page, and they were using like I think WordPress some time ago and some other things, and they constantly struggle with the updates there, right? They update like every other month or so, and then say, oh no, I totally forgot how WordPress works, and it's like also complicated and this kind of stuff. And they themselves, they work with files all the time, right? They copy and paste their Google Docs and whatever, like they always like send around files and emails and this kind of things. So what it ended up building for them is like saying, okay, here's like your structure, just throw in like folders, like name it in certain ways. You can throw like any kind of files into these folders. You just need to name them in one way. Like there's a meta YAML file that has like some structure that you need to put in there. The content file where it's just like simple markdown. And I gave them like some limitation on what you need to follow. But the cool thing is like this page is for them running like over a year now, and they didn't reach out to me once in this time because it's like just say, oh, I know how to copy a file. I know how like to change some values. And that like is super nice. And I even taught them how to use like Git and kind of push things up or so. And it's like just working for them out of the box. And kind of this pipeline to build in this way was like super successful for them. So yeah, let's jump back to some Node code here. And that was one of the things I was really super interested in and saying, okay, how can I make this happen in a nice way? And one thing is we're in the ES 2018-19 world by now or so. And of course, we want to use like async await everywhere and make like super nice code that's readable. And one thing that I had in my mind from working deep with Node is like there was like this callback hell we're all familiar with to a certain degree, and especially like file system. There's a lot of asynchronous operations happening. So one thing I stumbled over is, okay, you have like this promises key afterwards, and then you get like all the file system operations as promisified functions, which is super nice. So that's something we can make use of. And yeah, what I ended up doing is like I create like paths, say, okay, this is where things come from. And then I can already make use of these things with waiting for the file system to read certain files. The good thing is we're building a static site, so we have some extra time in kind of preparing everything. And if like something takes like 1 second or 2 seconds to build, it's not as critical to us. Yeah, you can use ES7 modules in Node. I think as long as you maybe use like Babel before, or if you use like a latest Node version, like I think Node 12 would not be a problem at all to use this. Yeah, and then we just like read our operations, wait for everything, and we can just wait. And then the other cool thing is, okay, I have a lot of files now. Like going through all the things can be images, whatever. And then I kind of sort of say, okay, reducers is also the next thing that sounds super cool to make use of these kind of files. And I really like reducers. And the cool thing is you can also make asynchronous reducers, what I didn't know before. So I researched a little bit. And the whole trick to this is like to kickstart it with a promise, basically. So in this case, we say our reducer runs with an accumulator promise. So always resolve this as one of the first steps. And then we just return the accumulator again. So we just need to make sure this is again like something that's promisified. That's a super weird word today for some reason. Okay. So yeah, you can just say accumulator, I wait for this promise to resolve, and then I do all the magic in here, like reading the file stream or whatever I want to do. And I'm going to go a little faster a few of the things so don't kind of like take up too much time of this meeting. But yeah, if we want to like process like markdown files, we can do this one of the next steps basically. And again, we just take this accumulator promise, we do a files reducer, and we can do whatever operation this we want to do. So this can be images, and images could work in a super similar fashion. Or say, okay, we run our process image, and there's a library called Sharp, which is super handy if you want to do like image manipulation in Node. Yeah, it's just super handy. So in this case, I did the same thing for all images that are in the folder. I run through them, I run my own reducer, and then I, for example, resize and save all of them. So I put them like in an extra folder. So I always have like a smaller version of them uploaded. So we don't end up with like a 7 megabyte image from the customer or so on the live server, which we do not want. The resize and save function could look something like this. So we can define our values, and like again, Sharp makes it like super easy to do this. And yeah, again, this is an asynchronous operation, and as we're still like in the whole file system writing, we can always make use of this in our code, even if it does a lot of like complex things. It is still like in a good readable fashion, I would say. So in this case, for example, if I have my catchy bag, I would have like a default catchy bag and a small catchy bag, and like they're optimized and things, which is nice. But yeah, let's jump to the important part, the write graph file. So once we have our post and our images, right, we get all of them into the place. That's where we then say, okay, now let's write our graph file, put it all back together. And that's also as easy as this one. We even can use it like a try catch. So if anything like happens, we can use like default JavaScript, and it kind of will give us any kind of like information if anything breaks. And it was like super handy. You can always see, okay, where did what fail and so on. That was quite handy so far. If we want to put it all together, that's like something how this looks like. But that should be just like a good example of how easy it is like to build like really a complex kind of pipeline in super easy ways and very readable code, basically. And that code is working usually quite nice. So the way for me like to run this kind of scripts, I just kind of use Node, and I currently run Node 12, but I think Node 10 is also fine. I think it already supports the async operation. Could be a problem with the import maybe or so, but otherwise this would work fine. And just like kick it off and you have your script running. So that's nice. Cool, let's jump to the next part. So the interesting thing is we have now our Vue application, right? And I was using Nuxt for my page, but Debbie can definitely talk more about this. But the cool thing, whatever you do, like whatever you end up using here, we can just import our graph file basically. And then I can like pick posts of this like graph file or do whatever I want to do and make it just in general available. And this is how easy I can incorporate everything in there. So I can already create my posts and all this kind of stuff, and now can actually generate all these pages in a very simple manner, and always have like the big data set underneath available for me by just like importing one graph file. I can traverse the tree as I need. So that's quite nice. And at this point, just want to say like automation for the win, and kind of automation is key here. So whatever you do is like try to automate as many steps as possible. I would say what's horrible is if you constantly have to remember 5 steps you need to do in your pipeline to make it work. So the easier it is or so, and the more things you can automate, the easier it is. Okay. Oops, who's this? So, and for example, I use like Netlify underneath it actually like to automate the whole like release and publishing process, which is nice. But yeah, let's jump to the next topic, right? We talked about serverless, right? And what about serverless? How does this all fit into the picture, and how can we build something with it? So one small example I was really curious for how to build it is on my personal blog, I built like this clapper. It was inspired by the Medium version, where it's on a Medium blog post, you can just clap underneath and say, okay, I appreciate it or whatever. And just some kind of interaction that's like more interesting than a like button. And for me, the interesting part was I did not want to keep track of any users. Like I don't do any kind of user tracking whatsoever. And then is how can I build this kind of feature like a purely serverless infrastructure, basically. So I try to break it down in what do we need, right? So one part is we need a way to store the data. Can be any kind of like database or anything, but we need a way to store the current number of claps, right? The next one is we need some kind of like functions, ideally like Lambda functions to retrieve and set data. This is often referred to as functions as a service. Yeah, Lambda functions is just a term. I think Amazon, like AWS, like they coined it first and they call it Lambda functions, at least in the cloud context. But by now you find like this FAAS or so on different kind of like operators or services that kind of offer this for you. And the third step we need to do is like our data preparation to get everything right. Cool, let's look at those pieces bit by bit. And the first one I was super curious about is like, okay, how can I store anything? And I was pointed towards FaunaDB, and that's an interesting database service. I did not want to go full into AWS or anything or so. And Fauna is quite an interesting part, especially if you're interested in using like GraphQL and all these kind of things. Like they offer a GraphQL layer. So that's quite handy. It's like just a database. I didn't want to write my GraphQL schemas in this case, so I tried to fall back to the other thing that the option, which was like the Fauna query language. Yeah, it's super weird in the beginning. It looked something like this. It was a little weird, so it was kind of the collections and how to operate it, all this kind of stuff. And you get like a lot of like refs out of as results. So that was, yeah, good to work with or so, but definitely challenging in the beginning. But yeah, that's it. FaunaDB, great database or so to have anything stored in the cloud. The next part I was curious, like using the Lambda functions. And the other thing I like to think about them is and that's one of the limitations, they're usually like these one-time functions, right, that run only once. The thing is, you cannot share like state between them or anything, or like store anything and kind of move it back. So it's always like, okay, I call a function, it does something, returns something, and that's it. And then I call it again, it doesn't know about anything before. But you can still do a lot of like cool things with like these one-time functions. Just one other service I really like is Firebase. And for example, what they start to do is like Lambda functions. They have like something called Firebase extensions, which is just like a nice, like some recipes or so prepared or so to use like these kind of functions. And you have things to like resize images or translate text or whatever you want to do. So you can do a lot of like really, really complex things, and they scale super well, which is nice. But yeah, we need our Lambda functions. And what are the things we need again? We need a function that's retrieving the data for us. And then we also need a function that kind of like stores the whole data for us. Right. If you're curious how the whole Clapper code looks and how to call this function, that's that. You don't have to type it or copy it anyway or so. I can share the link to the repository, and it's like actually open source and running it on GitLab. But otherwise, yeah, that's the whole clapping functionality in here. And as we say, first we need to kind of retrieve data. So this is what I try to do in this mounted section. We say, okay, you're mounted, get me the actual latest instance of data and whatever is there. And the way to kind of use this kind of or call these Lambda functions is we can just like fetch, and then we run exactly this function, which kind of runs whatever process we pass in. And as you see, we can give it like an ID, so it knows already what to do. And it's just like actually a file called get post Meta.js or something. It's lying there. And Netlify streamlines this process for us and makes it very easy kind of to take care of it and kind of get access to these functions. But that's that. So we're calling our code here. And then the other one is we need to sync and store the data again, right? So that's what we do in a sync clap function, basically. I use a debounce in this one just to be performant and don't call it like unnecessarily after every clap. But you can do things like this where say, okay, like I just kind of get the current count of the current claps or so. Again, I send something to the Netlify function, call it. You can see like post data. And we just make use of the fetch function, right? Which is like just the browser specific. So no extra magic needed for us, which is quite nice. And then we always like wait for the final function and kind of update our counters should somebody else have clapped in the meantime. That's that. So if we look at the functions, on the top left, you see where this function is kind of lying. And there's the folder function / and get post Meta.js. And basically, if we want to retrieve the data and see what's there, that's that. Like this is our kind of fauna query that we call, and it kind of returns everything for us, which is nice. The other thing, if we want to update anything, that's a little more complex because again, we need to query everything and kind of get the latest number. Because again, we cannot interact between like these functions on their own and like they're like really stateless and one-time functions. So if we want to have the latest information, then we always need to kind of query it again. Say, okay, give me this number. And then I update it and mesh it together with like my current claps. So I'm always on the latest number actually. And then I send it back to the server and actually call the query update. And that's where I actually store it. So that looks a little more complex, but also not too heavy actually. And that's most of the function actually. Right. I think those slides are just trying to break down what I just explained, right? Good. Last one is data preparation, which is important. So yeah, let's look at the data. And again, we said there was this part where we see our data needs to communicate with our backend. And we need to give it a heads up. Like if we create anything locally and we upload a new version of the site or whatever, our server needs to know about this in advance, right? Otherwise, a query for something that's not there might have like weird errors for our customers. And again, automation is key. So what I did is like, whenever I want to create something or so, I use like the script, create a post. And it looks something like this. And there's nothing more. It creates a markdown with like all the right configuration values. I can even ask for the title and prepare this file for you accordingly. And you end up with a file looking something like this, and it's ready for you to go. So all we can do now, or need to do now, is we tell our netlify function to say, okay, now execute this script in the context of netlify, so we have access to all the Fauna stuff right out of the box to kind of create this post meta for us already. And that's the cool thing, we can like automate this. So we can call this function again directly after we create the post and the file is created. We just like run the script automatically. So now our Fauna DB will know about this. This is how, in this case, the script looks like. Like we can really talk to Fauna DB, say, okay, give me anything back. We can, yeah, ask for the title or anything, or pass in the ID, and that's working. And then we kind of like send this Fauna DB secret. And that's one of the nice things how it's integrated with Netlify. We don't need to store any of these secrets ourselves or need to keep track of these. Like that's Netlify is taking care of this with their Netlify CLI, which makes it quite nice. And then we just like go ahead and just create this post meta right in the database. So our database is eventually prepared once anything goes up or this like new post goes live at any point in time. So all I can say is like, if we have all like these opportunities and capabilities of things, static sites in general are super, super awesome. And in general, with serverless, to just get even more awesome, right? And that was it from my part. And all I can say, if you have any question or anything that was not answered or curious about anything, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. Otherwise, if you're curious, like on codeprio.com, you see just a lot of things that we talked about in action. And that's that. And with this, I give it back to Joss.
Well, thank you very much, Roman. I don't know if anyone has any questions right now. I think we can take a minute or two, but otherwise, like you said, we can also reach out to you online, where I think they maybe get even a more personal answer than they will get here. So unless people have questions right now, we will proceed. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Roman. Really appreciated that you made your time tonight to show up on our virtual meetup. We think it's really useful that also industry leaders like you are willing to share their knowledge with the rest of the world. And I see a few other ones. Chirac has a question: how useful serverless with dynamic site like any e-commerce sites?
Okay, that's a good question. So in this case, depending on how you generate like all your store pages or your e-commerce pages, but for example, there are a lot of like online store serverless functionalities available for you already, where say you can like completely, create your kind of like store goods or anything you want to have like in a nice data set or so, and they offer you like simple APIs to how to put everything together in a shopping cart basically, and do the whole payment processes. I think that we currently use a lot. The good thing is, if we have like a structure of all this kind of like goods that we're having available, either we use a single page application to say it's dynamically fetching all this kind of data, or otherwise, so if we don't update the shop too often, we can either really render a lot of like static sites for every shop cart item. But parts like the shopping cart are always like interactive, and those things will just benefit from using APIs and like some Vue SPAs or however you want to kind of put it all together.
All right. Last question from Matthijs. Easy to integrate with AWS Lambda or Azure Functions?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like these kind of functions, they all operate in a super similar fashion. I would say the biggest downside is probably if let's say you're hosting on Netlify, then it might be a little trickier to get like certain secrets in there if you like want to call this function in the right context, because Netlify built a few of those parts in their own like CLIs, but otherwise they work in the same way. In this case, Netlify even leverages AWS underneath it and using like the Lambda functions there. For Azure, I said you like need to probably take care of some of the wiring yourself, but shouldn't be much of a difference in kind of calling these functions.
All right, Roman. Ending your talk with this. Thank you very much for your time. We hope to see you soon when things are a little bit more normal. Let's hope maybe on one of the road trips or on one of the other conferences. And we hope to stay in touch with you. Thank you very much for your time.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye, Roman. All right. Our next speaker will be Debbie. We know Debbie for quite some time as well. Hey, Debbie, how are you doing? Debbie spoke for the first time, I think, during road trip Barcelona. That was in 2019, and back then she already said, like, I really, really, really want to present on the yearly conference you're organizing. And well, I think she made that happen herself by filling out call for papers, and we approached her for it as well. And tonight she's here to talk to you about Nuxt and static sites. So please give it away for Debbie. Good luck.
Thank you, Joss. Hi, everyone. This is really weird because normally you go into a meetup, you walk into a room, and there's loads of people, and you can't see anyone right now. So I have the chat open, and I'm expecting you all to just like, you know, say hello and smile faces and, you know, basically be the people that you always are. I'm looking in the chat, and there's some seriously cool people in this virtual room. So this is really cool. Okay, I promise this talk is going to be very dynamic. It was a great talk there by Roman, and I know you've already had an hour of talk, so seriously, it's going to be really cool. So are you ready? I'm going to share my screen. This is the hardest thing in the world. Share screen. Dun, dun, dun. And we are ready to go. Oh, okay, and 1 second. Keynotes has disappeared. See, this is why I hate doing talks with no technical people. There we go, and we're ready. Okay, beautiful. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is static sites equals great performance with Nuxt. So for those who don't know me, I'm Debbie O'Brien. I'm a front-end tech lead in Patterson Agency. I am a Nuxt team member, in case you didn't know by the close. I contribute to Webpack. I write for Ultimate Courses, a teacher at Vue School, and an organizer of Mallorca.js and Vue School. So later, if you want to continue following me, Debbie O'Brien on LinkedIn and Debs_O'Brien on Twitter. I'm also a Cloud and Airy media developer expert and a Google developer expert and a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional. And, you know, before the start of the year, in January, I was on a cruise ship, and I was kind of like practice for this whole like be in isolation, because we had 16 days that we weren't allowed off the ship practically. So this is kind of like practice for these days. Okay, so today, what we're going to do is we are going to get rid of the lamp. No more Aladdin. We're going to get rid of the mean. No more mean people. And we're going to let the jam take over. Hope you like jam. So what I'm going to cover, basically the new front end, static versus dynamic. I'm going to show you a case study, some performance tips, and some useful links at the end. Okay, so what has changed, right? Everything is now pre-rendered at build time. So we build things ahead of time, and then we send them to a CDN so they can get to a browser quicker. And sites are served statically, so we don't have to perform any execution at request time or on some kind of server. And this just like simplifies deployment. So a lot of functionality that was traditionally processed in the backend now takes place in the user's browser. For example, like form validations or we can just call out to a URL to make a payment, for example. So it's really all about the APIs. Yeah, you've got search functionality, for example. There's a lot of really, really cool APIs out there. I'm sure you're using many of them. For example, you've got Angolia for search functionalities, and it's like, just leveraging those APIs. Payments, for example, Stripe. It just makes things a lot easier, and you're able to use all these cool things, authentication as well, with OAuth or Auth, and like basically just so much more. It's just like APIs are like our superpowers, right? So what do we gain? We improve security, because like now it's a static site, so generally there's a smaller attack vendor. And we improve performance. And we need more performant websites, especially now we're all like on the internet. We need our sites to be as performant as possible, because we're like, all just using up all that bandwidth. The better developer experience as well as going Jamstack means we can allow us to do and to write in the framework we want and just basically have a better developer experience. Separations of concern, you've got no backend and front-end code mixed together anymore. And you've got like deployment confidence, better security, just so much more. Loving the emojis, keep coming them in. Okay, so definition of static. Lacking in movement, action, or change, especially in an undesirable or uninteresting way. Oops. Yeah, try selling that one to a client. I'm going to build you a static site and it's going to be lacking movement, action, or change, and it's going to be uninteresting. Yeah, that makes it really difficult, right? So I'm going to talk about Taekwondo instead. So basically, I'm a 4th-degree Taekwondo black belt. And in Taekwondo, we perform like patterns, or some people call it katas. And at the end of like when you're doing a competition or when you're in class, at the end of your pattern, you have to remain in a position until the master, the judge, calls paro, which means stop and means kind of relax. So you would have to hold that position. It's really hard to do talks when you're sitting in a chair. So I'm going to like do Taekwondo while sitting in a chair. So yeah, you hold that position. And this position is like a static position, right? So think about that. There's static in everything. So in a movement, I'm going to show you quickly here. This is a static movement. Yeah, you can see this Taekwondo person here, pretty static. However, there are very dynamic movements in Taekwondo. Now, I am not going to do the next movement while sitting in my chair because I would probably, break everything. Dynamic movements in Taekwondo, for example,
Oh, I think we lost Debbie for a second. Let's give her a chance. Let's give her a chance to come back online. Pooya is already troubleshooting with me by putting it on screen. Keep hanging in there. Thanks, Alex. Well, if anyone already has any questions in the meantime, please already come up with them. Or if you have any interesting comments or features to share, please do them now. I think Debbie will be back in a few seconds, and otherwise we will continue with Pooya. Pooya is also already in the room. I hope you're all really enjoying the second edition of the virtual meetup. Actually, for Vuejs Amsterdam, it's the first edition. It's the first Vue-related meetup. We would really like to hear your feedback, also when it comes to what do you think of these virtual meetups? What can we do better? What do you think of timing, dates? What do you think of topics, speakers? Debbie's not here now anyway, so you can spill the beans. Let's check in with Debbie. What happened? I think Debbie is making her way back. Okay, Debbie's troubleshooting real quick from home on mobile. I think she lost her internet connection. If you can just give us a few seconds, that would help a lot. Sergey, oh, well, thank you. That's actually really great. We will do more social announcements. We're always trying to be a little bit diverse in our social announcements, but it's great to hear that that there should be a little bit more of a repetition of these ones. We also started a newsletter where we are really trying to keep people up to date on our latest developments and on what we do. So it's great to have feedback on that. Beth. Oh yeah, well that's actually a good one. We try to communicate it a little bit. Hey, there's Debbie. We try to communicate it a little bit in time. But yeah, that's good feedback. Actually, for next time, so we'll make sure that that will be the cover of the next live feed already, and that it will be communicated. If the Vue 3 release is on track, I will let that to the experts, to be honest. I'm going to give the word back to Debbie. Debbie, I'm happy that you made it back on screen. Please take away.
Okay, so I managed to break the internet. How cool is that? My whole house went out. So I'm hoping that it lasts up. I'm now connected to my mobile phone. So yeah, let's see how this goes. But this is your worst nightmare, right? Giving a live talk and the internet goes, but it can happen. So, right, I have no idea where I left off. So I'm just going to hope for the best and hope that I can catch up. Are you ready? I'm going to share screen. And okay, nearly there. Okay, so are you all with me yet? Where dynamic is. Static is the new dynamic. I'm going to go from here, and I hope that this is pretty much where I was. Okay, so basically, static is the new dynamic. So basically, now we're going from our static sites, we're coming up to the CDN, and then we're just delivering it back to the user. So that just makes it so much more quicker, so much more performance. It's kind of like when we built sites in the 90s, right? That's how they were. They were really static and boring. But nowadays, we can do just so much more. And we've got no server needed, which is kind of very useful in times like this when, you know, your server could be stuck in your work offices. And now we've got like everything's, you know, we don't need a server. So everything's just, you know, up there in the CDN. So it's a lot easier. So it's kind of like superpowers, right? It's kind of really cool. So let's go back to Taekwondo for a second. I want you to just watch this video. I'm hoping that it plays. Basically, like this is how I look at things. Our static site is very static, and that's like the Taekwondo guy here, and he's very static. And then he jumps up on when we're building the website. He jumps up and he basically like gets all the data from the API, and he comes back down again. So he's static. When we're generating a new site, we're basically going up to the API. We're getting everything. We're coming back down again. We've got a static site. And that's how I want you to think of static sites. They are so dynamic because you've got in the background this Taekwondo guy basically jumping up and getting all your data and coming down. And that's what I want you to keep in mind. So basically, push and deploy, that's all you've got to do nowadays. You're building your site and you just push and deploy. So it increases confidence because, you know, every pull request becomes like its own staging environment. Staging is the same as production. So it increases confidence in what we're building and what we're deploying. You can deploy anywhere, anytime. So you can even deploy from a plane, but now you can't even get on a plane. But you can deploy when you've got like really bad Wi-Fi. So it's really important, like you can just deploy from everywhere. And I think that's kind of like the cool thing, especially now we're all stuck in our homes and we need to be able to deploy our website, and we can do that so much better with static sites. And like you've got webhooks on content change. So if you're using like a CMS, you can basically just go up and create a webhook that gets all that data on change, and then basically just regenerates the site for you. So you don't have to connect and deploy all the time when the content changes. You can use webhooks to do that. So that's like a lot of generation with static sites, right? But, you know, relax, take it easy. Don't worry about it, because that's just all done for you. So, you know, it's fine. So going Nuxt. Now, Nuxt is not just a static site generator, and I want to make that clear. It's not just for building static sites. Nuxt is a progressive Vue.js framework, and that means that basically when you're building your websites, you're still writing Vue, you're creating static sites, but you're still building as if you're building single-page applications. You're still writing your code in Vue. It's just you get all these extra cool benefits, such as like automatic routing and code splitting. You get so much more. Nuxt inlines your CSS for you, so it takes care of like critical CSS. There's pre-fetching of routes, so it already kind of knows what next page you might go to, what links you might go to, and it pre-fetches those already, so they're ready to go for when the user needs to click it. So benefits of Nuxt: file-based routing, which is what we talked about. Automatic code splitting of routes. You don't even have to like have a root.js file. You just put everything into the pages folder, and Nuxt just does all the magic for you. Prefetching. So yeah, prefetching, as we talked about, and there's more than 50 modules. So you can like set up a PWA, progressive web app. You've got Google Analytics. You've got sitemap. You've got so many modules, and it's really simple. It takes seconds to basically set up all these cool modules. And you can have like single page application, server-side rendering, or static sites. So I'm talking about static sites, but you can still use Nuxt for single page applications and server-side rendering. And if you already have a website already built as a single page application, then you, at this moment, now this will change, so bear with me, but at the moment, you've just got to put mode universal. So your single page application, change it to mode universal, and you'll be able to transfer it into a static site. If you're in single page application, you would have normally the mode SPA. And then in your static sites, you just use Nuxt generate. So just by calling Nuxt generate, it's going to basically generate that site for you, which is kind of pretty cool, right? Because it makes it very simple. It basically means that right now, you can all basically just convert your single page application into a static site with a very small change of commands. Now, this is going to change very soon. So don't worry too much about how to do it now, like it will change, but it's going to be as simple to basically be able to change from one to the other. So I want you to just keep that in mind, that you can go back and forth. So I'm going to show you a quick case study, which is Patterson Travel, which is what we built, a Jamstack site built in Nuxt. So Patterson Travel is a travel site with a blog. It's got events, it's got a case studies. It's built in 3 languages and has about 144 generated pages. So we don't just generate one page for a blog, but for a page category, page for a post. And it takes about 74 seconds to generate all these pages, okay? So that's kind of not a lot of time, 74 seconds, you know, I can wait that. There's 5 layouts. We've got about 32 page components. There's about 38 components, 8 plugins, 9 modules, and 21 pages of docs. So we use VuePress inside our Nuxt app to create our documentation. So as you can see, it's not just a small site. It's kind of a medium-sized site, but has quite a lot in it. And we were able to create this as a Jamstack site. But we have a booking engine, right? So you're kind of looking down, okay, so I can book a hotel. I can add some dates in, how many adults, etc. So I can reserve a hotel, search for hotel, add a hotel, add extras such as T-shirts, check out, and receive confirmation of purchase. So, That's kind of interesting. How can I do that in a static site? Well, because the booking engine is actually a single page application. Okay, confused? Yeah, because we can have a single page application inside a static site, and that's kind of really, really cool. And basically, why is that important? Because, you know, we don't always want to have certain parts of our site as a static site. We want to leave them into, we can't like generate, you know, all the hotel combinations that the user is going to want. So we leave that as a single page application inside our static site. And it's really easy to do that with the SPA fallback. So basically, like generate, you just put fallback true and exclude the pages that you don't want. So in this case, everything that's in my booking folder will not be generated. So that's where I have all my booking, hotel page, payment page, etc. And that doesn't get generated, and it just falls back into single page application mode. Kind of cool, right? So how does it work? The site is pre-rendered, meaning everything is generated at build time. We have all our data, so we don't need to make any API calls when we load the page. Then when the user visits the page, Vue's hydration kicks in, making the site dynamic. And when we first load the page, we load from the static build. But on navigation, we call the API. That's true. So the first load is coming from the static build, and on navigation, we're calling the API. And this is just due to how Nuxt works. It is only static on first render. And after that, all calls to the API are made just like a normal single page application. So if you can see here, the API is calling on navigation, and every time you're changing the page, it's actually calling that via API. But you just want full static, right? You know, I don't want to call the API every time I navigate to a page, you know? I mean, yeah, I want to just like call the API once and that's it. Like, I want it to be really fully static. So can I not just have full static? Well, coming very soon, you can have full static where one API call on build, and then you will call the payload on navigation instead of calling the API. So this is a cool new feature that's coming out in the next version of Nuxt, and it's really, really cool. And I've been playing around with it and having some fun. Basically, it's the static module. It is coming soon. Okay, so watch out for it. It's coming very soon. And basically, this is what it'll do. It will call the payloads folder that's inside your Nuxt folder, and it will call a payload.json for every single folder you have, every single page you have is going to have that payload. And then basically you'll be able to just, I'm just reading Sebastian's comment. On top of that, the smart prefetching will also fetch the payload exactly. So it's a killer feature. You're right, Sergi. So yeah, this is basically just going to like prefetch all these payloads. So they're all just like ready to go. It's going to be super, super fast. And this is an example of it in action, as you can see here. It's calling the Nuxt folder, the payload folder, and this strange kind of number combination in there, the English, and it's calling the events page. So that's kind of really cool, amazing, game changer. I know it's really, really cool. I can't wait for it to actually just be live and for you all to play around with it like I've been playing around with. So this like static feature just allows us to have absolutely amazing performance, as you can imagine, right? So it's static sites, great performance. I mean, this is just like, it's just so easy to get with Nuxt, and especially with the static module, where performance is just really, really, really high, and you've just got like basically amazingly performant websites. So make sure you're doing an audit regularly, as things can change. Probably if you look at this site today, it might be different from what it was yesterday, but I checked it this morning, it was like that. So I hope nobody broke my site. Also, when you're building your websites, it's important to work on accessibility, best practices, and search engine optimization as well. And if you're looking at accessibility, okay, you need to write semantic HTML, labels for forms, area tags, and alt tags. And you're all probably saying, Debbie, we know all that, but are you actually implementing it correctly on all your sites? Because sometimes we can be a little bit lazy. So just kind of keep that in mind. And you've got like Chrome Dev Tools for accessibility. So even like your color contrast, you can actually hover over and you can see. So you can see the contrast here is AA 5.04 with a green tick. So that means, you know, I'm good to go. If that was in red, then you're going to have like problems with color contrast for people who can't see colors as good as we can. Auto optimize your images. Okay, so if you're using something like Cloudinary, this makes it even easier for you, much better, because basically you can just put in Q_auto and F_auto, and then it's going to basically get the best quality photo for you, and it's going to basically get the best format. So if you're using Chrome, it will get a WebP format, and if you're using I don't know, Internet Explorer, is that still alive? Then it will get like just a JPEG. Lazy load your images. So Chrome has a feature already called loading equals lazy. So it's very, very easy. Don't be lazy. Just like start lazy loading everything. Progressive web app. Now, this is one of my most favorite features, is the progressive web app. And it's so easy to install. Basically, you just have to like add the module. And the only really kind of hard work, I would guess, is to add an icon.png to the static folder. I mean, that's as hard as it gets. And then you got your PWA, which is then, it just means it's going to be able to use when you're on a train and you lose internet like we did earlier today. So basically, add PWAs to your site as often as possible. And with Nuxt, it's just so easy. So please go ahead and do it if you haven't already got a PWA set up. You can also check out your CSS stats. Now, I think this is really important because like CSS and JavaScript, these are like what makes your website less performant. So you really want to make sure you've got not too heavy a page with JS and with CSS as well. So I like to use Tailwind and with Purge CSS, and that just really, really, really helps to maintain the CSS and not have too much. You've also got modern mode. So make sure you're using modern mode with Nuxt. So Nuxt build --modern. You can also just use -m. If you're using a UI framework, yeah, some of the great UI frameworks like Vuetify, for example, now have tree shaking and they don't like put all the components on there. So depending on what you're using, just make sure you're using one that actually allows for that so that they kind of take off the ones, or you're only adding the components that you need and not the complete library. So yeah, Nuxt build modern mode. Basically, then we build client, a modern, and then the server. So we build this modern build, which then gets served to the cool browsers like Chrome. Code split from the start. This is probably going to sound like, you know, okay, duh, yeah, we know we should code split. But seriously, if you get into the habit of actually, you know, your footer component is not going to be needed up front. So if you get into the habit of writing your code splitting from the start, you're not going to have to go later on and code split everything. So just seriously keep that in mind straight away. Code split. Obviously, don't code split like, you know, the hero component or the navigation, right? You want to code split only what is going to be below the fold or on another kind of page, as in like a modal or something like that. Lazy load your translations. In Nuxt, this is really, really easy, okay? If you're using I18N, which I'm doing a course on right now in Vue School, and I'm using Vue, and I'm actually working on the one for this particularly for lazy loading. And I'm kind of like reading through it and I'm kind of going, I've got to do all this, what, seriously? But in Nuxt, I've got to just do lazy true. And actually, yeah, that's how easy it is. So basically, lazy true to lazy load your translations with Nuxt I18N. So make sure you're doing that. I already mentioned Tailwind and Purge CSS. And again, it's super simple. If you haven't already got it installed, you just have to, you know, add the module and then add Purge CSS. Now, if you're building a new site, this is already built in. So in the CLI of Nuxt, you'll just be able to choose Tailwind and you won't have to actually add it to the modules. It will just be done for you. But if you're not and you want to start using Tailwind in a project that you've already got running, then that's how simple it is. And in the whitelist pattern, make sure you put like, you know, if you find you're missing styles, because Tailwind can, or Purge CSS can get rid of some of the styles it thinks it doesn't need. So if you've got like especially styles from a third-party library, it might just kind of like, you know, delete them. So just put in like whitelist basically means do not delete this, this style. Okay, Webpack Analyzer. For those of you Webpack fans, basically just use the analyzer. It's really, really simple. Okay, so you can run this with Nuxt. You just put like -a and basically you'll get the analyzer and you'll be able to see and analyze the bundle. And you can see from here, we've got Moment and we're adding every single locale from every single like language in the world. And we only support 3 languages. So that's where we saw that, oh, this is not good. So you can basically find those errors and fix them. Yeah, and basically then you could change to something like Luxon instead of Moment, or you can basically change your packages and you can see how each package, how much it's taking up. So basically, my question, Jamstack, you know, do we need it? Hell yeah, because I'm taking on the fight and I hope you do too. And seriously, I want you to like, you know, answer this one question. Are you ready? Here's my question. Are you Nuxt? Because we are. So I want you to all go away today. I want you to all start building static sites. I want you to all start building Nuxt if you haven't already been using Nuxt. And I want you to I want to see the super cool websites that you're going to build, super cool Jamstack sites. Thank you very much. My name is Debbie O'Brien. And yeah, you can follow me on Debs_O'Brien. And, you know, any other questions you have throughout the week when you're building everything, sitting at home and you're bored, just connect with me through Twitter, because I'm sitting at home kind of bored alone as well. So we can just be bored alone together and build static sites. That's basically it. And here's just one slide with some useful links to the Nuxt boilerplate project that I created that you can download and play around with if you've never used Nuxt before. Also Nuxt, Tailwind, Purge CSS, CSS Stats, Cloudinary, and Lighthouse Audit. And that's pretty much it. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And thank you very much. Stop. Yay! I did it. I managed to, you know, break the internet and I got through. There was a couple of questions. Someone asked, was it Comic Sans? It's not actually. I used it. It's called marker felt, called a felt tip marker pen. So that's the style I was using. Is there any module exists for WordPress? Yeah, you can actually use headless WordPress. So we did have to. If you have to use WordPress, which we did have to, it's possible, and you can build it with that. There are much better CMSs out there, but if you need to use WordPress, it's possible. Any other questions? Let me see. How do you deal with validation stuff? So the user input handled by an API. So yeah, the validation, you just use the fantastic library by Damien to Vue validate, and that will just work on the client side. I don't know if that answered correctly. Dun, dun, dun.
Victor Nevis had a question.
I'm kind of scrolling on the iPad in here. Pros and cons of Vue sites. So there are so many pros, of course, and I think I spoke about quite a lot of them. So, you know, you've got like no server, so it's cheaper. You're saving the environment. At the moment, we're saving the environment quite a lot with not flying anywhere, traveling everywhere. We've seen the different impact it's made in the environment, and having no servers is also one of those pros. And it's it's cheaper, like it's practically free, yeah, because you can host on Netlify, you can host on GitHub Pages, so you don't need to pay those servers either. So that's kind of like a very big pro, and it's faster because it's just going to like a CDN. It's not going up to the servers and connecting to databases, etc. And the cons, well, you have to generate your website every time you make a change. So that's what some people don't like. Especially like if you're building an Amazon, for example, who have changes every couple of seconds, then, you know, maybe static sites is not for you. So there are use cases for everything. So just kind of know when you should use them, when you should not. But pretty much majority of times you can use static sites. So I would say that's pretty much my pros and cons. Any other questions?
From Nabil, how SEO is fully achieved in Nuxt this time?
How SEO is fully achieved? It's very easily achieved because Nuxt has it uses the Vue meta underneath it. So basically, you can just add meta in everyone. You can add it into your layouts, into your pages. So you've got very, very effective search engine optimization. So yeah, it's fantastic. And because it's already like pre-rendered, etc. Well, you know, Google finds it, everyone finds it. So it's yeah, it's search engine optimization. It's fantastic. Dun, dun, dun. Any other? CMS and Nuxt. Yeah, we should build a CMS. That would be cool. The Nuxt CMS. Maybe we should do that. Yeah, there's a lot of CMSs out there. I played around with Netlify just because it was very quick and easy to set up. So if you want to just build one very, very quickly, in the Netlify documentation, there's actually a tab for Nuxt, and it will tell you how to build that CMS directly using Nuxt. So that's what I would suggest to play around with. But there are so many more like amazing CMSs, like Craft and Contentful and Sanity and loads of others. So just play around with them all. They can all be used with Nuxt. Once it's headless, you can use it all. Are the slides available? Yeah, the slides will be available. I don't know, Joss, if you're making them available, but if not, on my Notice account, you can get them on there. Any experience with Nuxt and Vuex and web workers? Not really, because I just build a PWA and it just does everything for me. So, but Vuex, I haven't worked that much with Vuex. So I don't really have enough experience to really go into that. Yeah, so the slides, yeah. Reach out on Twitter and I'll post the link as well if you're stuck, if you can't find me. But if you can't find me, just go to debbie.codes and then you'll be able to find me. I'm everywhere then.
I think Adrian had a last question about does the new version of Nuxt support fully pre-generated content like GridSum?
Good question. I haven't played around with GridSum as such. So does it support dynamic detail page, for example, web shops, etc.? Is that a different question? I think I'm answering two questions at once. So yeah, what GridSum does, I haven't played around with GridSum, but it's kind of similar, but there will be differences, of course. So so it's not exactly the same. Just that excites about dynamic detail pages. So yeah, you can have dynamic detail pages, which would be like what I consider the booking engine of the hotel, where you have like dynamic different hotels depending on searches. And that's what I would use like as a single page application fallback inside the static site, if that makes sense. Okay. I hope I answered them all, but if I didn't, just like, just let me know. I repeat the question.
All right. That was great, Debbie. Thank you very much for your time.
If not, I have stickers to give away. Anyone want some stickers?
Will you ship them out, or do they have to wait until they see you in person the next time?
No, but the sweaters and the hats, all these are going to be on sale very soon. Once the world gets back into action and we have life again, you'll be able to buy all this as well. So you can all be Nuxters.
That's great to hear. We'll make sure to promote it. Thank you very much for your time, Debbie. Really appreciate it. And we hope to stay in touch. Hope to see you soon again.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Big applause for Debbie. All right, we're moving on to our next person. Really excited to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Pooya. Pooya is actually my direct colleague. We work a lot together. I'm not a developer, so we don't work directly in work-related matters, but he does a lot for our company, passionate people, and does a lot for this community and for the conferences. Pooya has actually built this live stream. At least he made sure that everything was working, up and running. He has been in touch with all of the speakers to make sure everything was technically arranged. So please, big applause for Pooya, and let him introduce himself and the state of Nuxt functions theme he's going to present about. Please, Pooya, take it away.
Hi, yes. Thanks for overwhelming welcoming. Actually, I'm really honored that we are colleagues and we had this opportunity to have live streams like this. And like these days, I think it's the best time that we can talk to each other and share the updates with each other. So yeah, let's begin. Actually, I promised to introduce something new. So I was thinking, why not share about last state of Nuxt functions, which is almost, actually we have some technical problems, but it's almost ready to beta testing. So in this talk, I'm going to talk more about in depth of the Nuxt functions and how we are proceeding with the updates. So as if you know, if you're already using Nuxt.js, Nuxt has a feature called server middleware. I think it's really exciting, actually, the moment that we added this feature. So it's really exciting because Nuxt had an internal web server is using Connect for handling requests. So we was thinking, why not make it available to users and modules to provide their own middleware? So this way you can create simple APIs. But it has lots of drawbacks for itself. For example, you need to fully restart your server if you want to change the API. because it was mainly used for internal use cases. So in last release of Nuxt.js 2.12, we finally added HMR support. It's buildless without any build. It's using internal cache system of Node.js to support HMR. So it's already much better now, but it has also some drawbacks. Like, first of all, you couldn't use aliases for imports because basically it's a Node.js module. It's not runtime. There's no build step, so in the production you have to deploy entire API if you are writing your API using server middleware, and it has really poor serverless support. Actually, it was the main intention behind we thought about redesigning something to make it more friendlier with a serverless, because nowadays everyone is migrating to using serverless and full statics, and it's cost efficiently, it's not really a good idea to have a full server in your backend side. And also because we are using optimized version, is using a more lightweight version of Express. If you write a server middleware, you don't have helpers like rest.json. So basically you have to JSON stringify every time, or for sending cookies. So there was lots of reasons that we was thinking that why not making it easier for users. But Nuxt is a progressive framework, and you can already use it for creating your sorry, I think my video is gone. For creating your own application, why not adding the backend to the stack? So you have every tool to create your own website. So we started thinking about Nuxt functions. Actually, it was started with a great idea of Sebastian, which is available in the RFCs. You can find it out in the link in the bottom. Basically, functions are kind of higher level server middleware without getting into low-level stuff. Instead of registering server middleware in your Nuxt config, you can now simply put functions in the functions directory, similar to pages. And it's automatically based on the convention of file naming for namespacing, and everything is already registered in your application. We will talk more in depth about it. This is integrated with the runtime, so you don't need to make API calls. You can directly use these sort of functions everywhere, just like Axios, and don't worry about how the request is being made. It is optimized for Lambda target, which is another cool feature we are currently investigating on this. So basically, if you create your API using functions, and then you are deploying to somewhere like AWS or Netlify, is already supporting that. You don't need to be worried about packaging. And finally, out of the box, it supports helpers like rest.json. So you don't need to also write your own or using Express. And another cool feature is that modules can provide functions. For example, if you, it's usually in the first stage of developing a website, you need some JSON files for mocking API. So because we have an abstraction layer called meta, functions meta, we'll talk about later, this allows to mocking or providing functions with modules. It's gonna be another modular feature of the Nuxt. And it's working kind of like RPC. Actually, there are different approaches of writing API, like making API calls using GraphQL, or this one is also another way, which is RPC. And we believe that this is the easiest way for writing simple functions. Like, for example, if you want to create a function for submitting user form, it's much easier comparing to other solutions. It's like a simple function, and you just call the function without being worried how it is working on the ground. So here's a small demo of how you can expect writing a module, a function. In your project, you can create functions out user.js and export the middleware-like thing, like a function with rig and rest and response to object. And magically, out of magic, you can use it in your pages without being worried how it is working behind the scenes. There is a $ functions available always in the context that it is namespaced. So because the directory name is auth, it's auth, and user is get user, is mapped to get user. And the response would be the user, the object that you need. And this function call behind the scenes is working some interesting. For server side, we don't want to waste resources. So instead of making an HTTP call on the server side, we use direct function calls. So without any latency, we directly call the function and get the response. But in the client side, we create HTTP requests. So as I was mentioning, everything in this functions feature that we are going to add is based on meta. This meta allows lots of more possibilities, more than just having a functions directory. It allows modules to register functions. So by default, there's a directory loader that loads all of the functions from functions directory. It's shared. This meta is being shared between builder and runtime because both of them require this meta. Builder needs it to package the functions bundle, JavaScript bundle, and runtime needs it because when you have $functions.namespace.function name, the runtime needs to know the name of the functions and available functions. So you don't need to put a URL in the functions call. You just call them by name. And the most interesting part is that it gives us ability to auto-generate the types and docs documentation. So in your IDE, when you type functions dot, it allows you to have it autocomplete. It's like quite different experience comparing to a normal REST function usage. And this is an example of how this is being generated. It contains a file, which is basically the name of the file that Nuxt needs to be compiled. You don't need to worry about it. This is how it's working underneath. All of the functions have a namespace, which allows to prevent the conflicts. They have a name. They have a payload type, which I'm going to explain it more. And I saw a question in the previous talks that how to validate the function calls, the requests. Because we are generating this meta based on the functions, we have ability to define which params this function supports or how is the shape of the response. This meta is extracted from the functions themselves and put it in the meta. So this meta can be shared between client and server. So when you call these functions that are login, for example, in the client side, obviously, for server side is direct function call, but for client side, we need to make an HTTP request, which is kind of challenging for us right now because for making this HTTP request, you need an endpoint first of all, which has to respond to this request. And you need to also pass the arguments that you are calling this function, the user, this object, to the payload. So we have two options for sending the payload, which is using query parameters or HTTP post, which each of them has its own cons and pros. For HTTP post, actually, we cannot use it for webhooks. For example, if you want to create a function to have a webhook to rebuild a website, or you want to create a function that's, for example, a webhook for GitHub, you cannot use post because you need to put it in the query string, which is one advantage of query string. One of the most advantages of query string is response caching, because usually you need to allow browser to cache the responses. If you send the payload with the HTTP post, basically it's not cacheable. But it has its own advantage as well. First of all, it's secure, the post, because the query string will be logged in the web server logs, or if there is a proxy between, but the post body is always secured. And also it allows you to sending blobs. Like for example, if you want to upload a picture, using query string, we need to serialize it, which is going to add lots of overload. But post is adding it to sending as a raw binary data, which is more efficient. But don't worry about this. Probably we are going to set query string as the default one because it's easier for developers to test, but allowing to marking some of the functions to be secure and using post body. One of the cool possibilities that we can have with functions is that it's not just a function. You can add countless integrations to the Nuxt out of the box. However, just how you are using PWA module to add in PWA, now we will have the possibility to integrate payments, database systems like FoundedDB that was mentioned, or contact forms, authentication, anything that you can imagine. It can be easily added with functions. But there is also a question how to integrate that, how to support service integrations with functions. First of all, what we can think is like a traditional approach that, like, for example, if you are creating an Express website, you register your MongoDB database as a middleware, and during the server startup time, the MongoDB connection will be being made, and afterwards is available for handlers. But we are thinking of functions for serverless first. For serverless, it's not efficient to load all of the services beforehand until we really need them, and we really need to initialize them. If you are going to use the global pattern, which is classic, but we are not going this way, services should be registered first of all. Like in the Nuxt config, you have to register that I need MongoDB service. Also, during the function call, it's always connected. Like as soon as the user is making a request, it's being loaded. So we just need to globally register every service, and you have to also declare it. The alternative approach that I was thinking about is using hooks for functions. So whenever, like after validation, and when you are sure that you are really going to make a DB call, you can initialize the database using for example, just imaginary module like Nuxt.js DB or Nuxt.js FoundedDB. And exactly the time that you need it, you initialize it and use it. So it's much more efficient. It's on-demand initialization is more straightforward for usage and for documentation because you exactly know what is being imported. It has better autocomplete support for IDEs because it's a function. It's not like a magic to be service injected. And also, it's not implicit. So, for example, if you want to split your code, just like the problems with the Vue, it's like when you want to create some shareable code between different functions, you usually need to implicitly require services. Like, because some of the services require body parsing, you need to always initialize body parser. But this way, you don't need it anymore because exactly when you need it, you import it through explicit importing. Another important part of this project that I was working on was the builder part, because for server middleware, we don't have any builder. It's quite fast, but we need a builder if you want to have more efficient deployments, production, and also better developer experience. So Nuxt by default is using Webpack. It actually has a multi-compiler Webpack configuration, which is by default having two configurations for client and server. And if you enable the modern mode, it's adding another builder. So you have 3 bars. But now, after you create your first function, another builder will be added for functions, which is quite fast because it's plain Node.js. It's adding support of every feature that you was already having your Nuxt.js, including aliases. And the final bundle, one of the cool features is that it's creating another bundle called functions.js in the dist, which you can directly deploy on serverless. And for example, if you hit a request to the functions. You don't need to load the entire SSR bundle. Only the things that are required are imported. And just like Nuxt.js pages, functions are lazy loaded and code splitted. So this code splitting is saving memory for the serverless environments. Last thing that we are currently working on to make it finalized to public beta is we need to support in-memory HMR, because currently it's output into the file system. But for development mode, it's usually much faster if we load it in the memory. So that's the only remaining thing that we are working on. I hope the information I gave you was useful. I'm sorry because some parts of the stack was kind of technical, or you need to be already familiar with the Nuxt concepts to know them. But I really hope that it was useful, and any questions, I'm available. Thanks for your attention.
Hello. Wow. Thanks, Pooya. Looking at the comments, everybody really enjoyed it. Let's wait for a second. Maybe we have some questions coming in. Already saw that Sap and Alex also have been really active answering questions in between. Maybe give it a few seconds for people to react. Actually, in the meantime, I'll post a beautiful link for people. In case people are watching this today and they're really excited of how things went and they feel like they want to contribute something themselves, please fill out the call for papers. Down here somewhere, I believe. And then hopefully we see you on screen in our future meetups. In the meantime, we're getting a lot of thank yous and great jobs. I believe that order story was really clear. Can people also reach out to you via Twitter or GitHub or any other platform, Pooya, if they have any questions related to this presentation?
Actually, I'm trying to look in the questions. One of the interesting questions by us is that about functions gateway. Actually, it's interesting question because usually when we was comparing Nuxt with other frameworks that are already supporting functions or API routes, for example, they usually bind the way of the integration for serverless environments. So, for example, if you want to use them, you have to use the CLI. So these functions, because of the meta abstraction, allows you to develop them regardless of how you are going to deploy the functions. And this gateway, so it's like abstraction, like serverless framework. So you don't need to worry how it is finally working. And I think it's the main advantage of this. So for this example, I really hope I could demonstrate it right now, but it could be as simple as just using Nuxt deploy and Nuxt deploy identify, because it's another cool feature that we are going to announce probably in next month, which is called Nuxt deploy. And using it, you can use off-the-shelf deployment modules, so you don't need to do anything, and everything is already handled thanks to this meta abstraction.
Okay. I don't know. Do you see any questions we might have missed, Pooya?
Actually, no, there was more sentences. Thanks for overwhelming sentences. And yeah, you kind of don't need API backend now. But I think the point to this sentence is that API functions are going to be so cool, but we have to keep in mind that they have a limitation in functionality. So if you are going to create a huge enterprise application, probably it's better to have a full stack API separated from Nuxt. And it's basically it's like the same philosophy of the Nuxt.js is a progressive enhancement. So you can quickly use API functions to shape your website, but at a point, probably it's better to separate the concerns and separate the API part. But the good point is that it still is somehow possible to provide the meta of an external framework to the functions. So the code doesn't need to be rewritten after you externalize the API part. It's just you've changed the functions to a separate API and provide the same meta with the same namespaces.
I also saw that Ionat Z had a question.
Any middleware for these functions? Actually, internally, Nuxt is registering a server middleware. So there's no middleware, if I understand your question correctly. And if you want to support, for example, add something like body parser, it's not possible because we want to keep them lightweight. But out of the box, they are supporting some helpers for parsing body and sending responses or setting cookies. So it's kind of limited set of functionalities similar to other serverless platforms. But the power is that if you want to add functionality of a middleware, you can use services, function services. So I think here we are. And again, thanks for your attention. And this talk is recorded. I'm really sorry that we didn't notify you beforehand in the Nuxt Discord channel. But if you had any more questions, just directly ping us in the Discord. So this talk I think, is going to be available forever here. And if you had any questions later, just ping us in the Discord. We'll be more than happy to talk there.
For people that don't know where the Nuxt Discord is, what's the easiest way for them to find it?
If you go to the Nuxt.js repository, there's a link to Discord. I think it should be also available on the website. In the resources part, no. Yes, in the footer of the website. Let me show. There's a link to Discord.
Ah, look at that. Straight away at the bottom under follow. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Pooya. Looking at all the reactions and all the questions and the remarks you got, people really, really seem to enjoy this. I really hope that we can do this more often from here on forward. Even in times that we might be able to do them in person again, I still hope that we can continue to bring the Vue love and the Nuxt love and JavaScript knowledge sharing in general still forward over the internet as well, because people really seem to enjoy it, and especially for people that might not be able to attend them in person all the time, this is a great solution. Would like to really, really thank you for your time and for all the help you've done so far, and which you hopefully will still be doing in the future. Really big applause for Pooya for making this possible and for speaking. Woo! Thank you very much.
I hope we had video of everyone, but it's on the video.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And one more note, if you had any feedbacks about the meetup, just feel free to reach us. We have comments here or social media. So because it's our second meetup and we are always looking forward for improving the quality.
Yes, exactly. We will do a new meetup next Thursday. I will make sure this will be announced and a new live stream will be announced. So if you subscribe down here on the subscribe button, you will be notified each time we do something, and you will stay top with everything we publish, basically. Like, share, and subscribe. Indeed, thank you very much, Marco. Marco is one of our colleagues. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully see you next week. Thank you all.
See you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.